going on, everybody? It's YG here, coming at you with another video. So as you all know, the Albaz Strike structure deck has finally dropped over here in the TCG for everybody, and so I decided to be like every other YouTuber right now and make a deck profile of what you can exactly do with 3 of these structure decks, because arguably this structure deck is probably the best one we've had since the Shadal one back in like what, 2020, something like that. And so I think it's really great for newer players to pick this structure deck up, not just for what the deck itself can actually do, but also for all the reprints and staples that have been slapped into this, because let's face it, it's probably the best we've ever gotten in terms of reprints and staples. I think as well though that this deck actually, just with 3 structure decks alone, can do really good more casually as something like a locals, and it can be made even better by spending just a little bit of extra money on the side, aside from your $30 that you spend on the 3 structures, for certain other cards that could help make it better. But with that out of the way though, I do want to go ahead and get right into the deck profile. Keep in mind this is made completely using only 3 structure decks, so it's going to run you about $36 roughly MSRP now, because they do run for anywhere from $10.99 to $11.99, inflation and whatnot. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So starting off, we have 3 copies of Fallen of Albaz. The entire structure deck revolves around him, therefore the deck itself also revolves around him. It's not going to look the greatest, sorry guys, I'm trying to do this with my camera being upside down. Let me just pull this out here. Yeah, so 3 copies of Fallen of Albaz. Again, the deck does completely revolve around him, and so you want to maximize being able to see him if you want to use a lot of your effects, though he can also be used in the deck for a lot of effects as well, and so it's perfectly fine even if you don't see him. Let me go ahead and just try to get the camera to focus a little bit better. There we go. Even drawing him isn't that bad if you don't have any other way to use him, because his effect to be basically super poly with the opponent's stuff is really nice. It's always welcome in a deck like this where, you know, the entire goal is to just fusion summon using your opponent's stuff or using your own stuff at the same time, and then every single fusion in the extra deck actually requires him, and so we do want to maximize our number of copies that we play of him. Next up, we have 2 copies of Albion, the Shrouded Dragon. He is basically our second set of Albaz, because he is treated as Albaz while on the field or in the graveyard, if I recall correctly, and he also has his own good set of effects, being able to either special himself from hand or place himself on the bottom of the deck and draw a card if you send copies of different things. I believe it is Fallen of Albaz or Branded Spell or Traps, sorry, from your hand or deck to the graveyard. If you sent from the hand, you actually get to special summon him for free, which is really nice because he has a 2500 body that's also a level 8. And if you sent from deck, you place him on the bottom of the deck, and if he was in your hand when you use the effect, then you can draw a card to basically replace himself, because his effect can be used while in the hand or in the graveyard. He's good for refreshing your hands as well as just being extra copies of Albaz, and he's just a free body that can also set up your branded spells and traps engraved that can do things. That's it for the actual Albazes, I should say. Let's go ahead and get on to the stuff around him. So we have 3 copies of Spriggan's Kit, of course. Spriggan's Kit is very good, basically being able to search your branded fusion and your other branded back row, not only just from your deck, but also from your graveyard or banished, I believe, which is really powerful. Let me go ahead and try to focus this again. Sorry about that. I don't have autofocus or anything on like that because I feel like manual focus is just better. But being able to add any of your branded spells and traps back from banished or graveyard, or just searching them from your deck, even if you do have to put 1 card from your hand on the bottom of the deck afterwards, I think that is super powerful in terms of your recursion and just your overall consistency. She also has her own special summoning condition, where if you control a Fallen of Albaz fusion monster, then you actually get to just special her from your hand. You actually don't even need to control the fusion monster. It can actually be in your graveyard as well, and you just get to special her for free. So that is super powerful, and you definitely want to be seeing her more than any other card. As well, she's not the only thing that can search our branded fusion. We also play 2 copies of Keeper of Dragon Magic. Keeper of Dragon Magic is very good for the deck, being able to search your branded fusion, of course, and ignoring the restriction basically on it, because it says that you're locked into fusions from the extra. Guess what? So does Keeper of Dragon Magic. And you also get to special summon your Fallen of Albaz from your graveyard in face-down offense position, which admittedly doesn't do much for Albaz's effect, but can work in case you need to have the things on field in order to fusion summon with it. And, you know, it's just free bodies on board, you know, might be able to help you in terms of protection. Also, he's very big. He's 18 and Kit is 17. So you're going to have really large beaters in case you really need them. Finally, for the things that mention Albaz, we play 2 copies of Tri-Brigade Mercurier. Unfortunately, it is terrible in actual Tri-Brigade, but it's really good in this archetype. It says when your opponent activates a monster effect while you control a fusion monster that lists Fallen of Albaz as material, you can send this card from your hand or face up field to the graveyard to negate the activation. I'm sorry, not activation, effect, but it doesn't really matter anyway. And while that is good, you mainly run it for the fact that it says that if it's banished, you actually get to search for a Fallen of Albaz or a monster that specifically lists it. except for another copy of itself. And so that's really good for adding things like Kit, especially because we do play things that can banish it, or you can just banish it using the regular fusion summoning stuff as well. Next up, for the more generic things, we do play one copy of Chaos Dragon Levianeer. I think Levianeer is a very good card, especially in here, because it does banish your things like Tri-Brigade Mercourier, and you do play a lot of lights and darks, so you can always get a free revive, a free hand rip, or free popping, which is probably what you're going to get the most. And so that's really nice removal in case you can't fusion some of your opponent's stuff for any reason. And also it is a giant 3k dragon. What more could you not want about this card? I do think this deck actually plays a lot better going second than it does going first. And so I am playing one copy of each kaiju that you are given, one copy of Thunder King, one copy of Radiant. I think both of these cards are kind of okay more than anything. I mean, they're no Gamma Seal or Jizakiryu or Dogoron or anything like that, but they're fine overall, especially being lights and darks for things like Levianeer. And they can also work really well with anything you may add to the deck from Despia. Because they are lights and darks, you can use your things like Priskenian and Masquerade, of course. But also, just having kaiju removal is really nice, especially if you open both of them, because you can give your opponent the Radiant, and then you yourself can keep the Thunder King, and you can just have a free body that can punch really hard, because he is 3,300. And that is it for the actual monsters. One of the great things about the Albaz Strike structure deck is that it gives you really good hand traps. And so we're playing 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and 3 copies of Effect Veiler. I think this is the most hand traps I've seen reprinted in a structure deck, unless Soulburner actually had Effect Veiler and Ash. But this is one of the best hand trap reprints I've seen in a while in a structure deck. Because, yeah, Effect Veiler isn't a lot of them, but it's always climbing in price very slowly as like a penny stonks card, and so it's always nice to keep it sort of in flow in the card economy. But also, Ghost Ogre getting a reprint, especially in a format like this that's completely dominated by the adventure token stuff and Hulk engines, is really nice. And it also just makes Ghost Ogre overall more affordable for a lot of other players, and so you're actually going to go very far, especially if you do go second, because you can open multiple hand traps, like, you know, 1 Ogre, 2 Veiler, and then, you know, maybe your Spriggan's Kit and your Branded Fusion. And so I think it's very good to have all of these hand traps given by Konami in this structure deck, because it allows newer players to have their hands on, you know, hand traps without having to break the bank with something like Dual Devastator. That is it for all of the monsters. Onto the back row, of course, we have our 3 copies of Branded Fusion. Branded Fusion is the heart and soul of this deck. There is a reason why this card is so feared. Being able to use materials from your deck for free with basically no restriction, since you're only going to really be fusion summoning anyway, even with use of something like Verte as well, you can just ignore the restriction entirely, which is completely absurd. It also gets you a bunch of resources in Grave, which can give you access to things like Dragoon, El Shadal Winda, all sorts of busted cards like that, for completely free, just for opening this card. Branded Fusion is going to be a big impact on the game, and with that being said, is of course great in this deck, since all of your fusion monsters list Albaz's material. This gives you access to every single one. Just in case we can't use Branded Fusion, we also play 2 copies of Branded in White. Branded in White is basically just better polymerization, because it also acts as a miracle fusion. And so you can just completely get free resources, especially because it does banish if you use materials from your graveyard, so that you can use something like Tri-Brigade Mercourier and get its effect to go off. And so it's basically just either alternative ways to fusion summon or extra ways to fusion summon on top of what you already have. I also do play 2 copies of Branded in Lost. I think this card is really, really good. So granted, it protects your fusion spells and stuff from being negated, right? Except for from things like Ash, because Ash negates the effect and not the activation. But this does protect from things like Solemn Warning, Judgment, or anything that negates activation as an Omni Negate. And so you don't really have to worry too much when you're going second about your stuff getting stopped. And it also allows you to get free search power for Albaz or a monster that lists it. It's essentially Tri-Brigade Mercourier, but it works when you fusion summon anything, so it might be a little easier to pull off. And of course, remember, this does give you access to things like your kit, and it also can get you Mercourier, which is really, really cool. I think this card is actually really nice to have in the deck, because if you're going second, you really want to protect your stuff. And so I think getting this on board is really crucial, but you don't want to see it like all the time, you know? I just realized the frame rate is kind of I'm so sorry. But there's not really much I can do about that now, can I? But we do play 1 copy of Branded Bond for the rest of our branded back row, or at least in terms of spells. I think Branded Bond is okay. Being able to special an Albaz from your hand, grave, or banished. This can really help if your opponent has, like, you know, hit your Albaz in some way, or in case you use Branded Fusion to dump it, and you want to fuse with your opponent's stuff still, you can use the Branded Bond to special it back, and then go ahead and get your fusion monster on board. It's also really good in the grind game, of course, being able to give you access to these things again. And so I think just the 1 of is perfectly fine, because, you know, you can search it off of kit. That's it for all the branded spells. On to the rest of them. We do play 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance because we play essentially maxed out copies of all the fusions that we were given, and there's nothing else that really draws cards in the deck, and so having the 3 extra is actually really nice, even though you do have to use in the very beginning of the turn. You also can lose all 3 copies of something like Mirror Jade, which can be really bad, but still drawing a 2, especially going second and getting more resources to break your opponent's board, is always really nice, and therefore I think it is really good to have in the deck. Plus, this is probably one of the best reprints we've had in a structure in a while. Again, we really do want to go second with this deck, so I am playing 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. So while it does prevent you from being able to kill, you're probably not going to be able to anyway unless you overcommit to a bunch of resources. However, this is really nice against big boards where you really want to super poly with your opponent's stuff using your Albaz, but it's going to get negated, right? And so you're going to use your Dark Ruler, slap that baby down, and now you are perfectly free to go ahead and super poly with your opponent's things. This is quite a flex spot, especially if you do want to play more going first, but I think going second is the better way to go with the 3 structure deck method. We also play 1 copy of Gold Sarcophagus for our Tri-Brigade Mercurier because it does give you free access to your Spriggan's kit. And then we play the 1 copy of Called by the Grave in order to allow some of your combos to go off, especially things like Kit being effect failured or ashed or something like that. Or keep in mind she can also be ghost spelled, which is really scary, especially because ghost spell is going to be a lot better in the format with Despia running around. And so, of course, we are going to play the 1 Called by. That's it for the spells. Onto the traps. We have 1 copy of Branded Sword, 1 copy of Judgment of the Branded, and 1 copy of Branded Retribution. I think all of these cards are just kind of painfully average. I mainly use Branded Sword for the graveyard effect in order to recur things, and Retribution also kind of falls along the same line as that. Judgment of the Branded is kind of good mass removal, but it only outs things that are equal or higher than it in terms of stats, and considering the lowest stats on any of your things in your extra is like, what, 2k? Nope, 2,500. You're really going to be outing boss monsters with that. I mean, I guess you can hit DPE, but it's going to float anyway. So it's just kind of overall mid. But Retribution's nice being able to negate things by shuffling your stuff back. Not only recurs your resources in the grind game, but also allows you to just get the negate period, is overall pretty powerful. And then, of course, both the graveyard effects to get recursion is probably the best part about the cards. Remember, you can send these off of Albion, by the way, and so that's how you mostly get them into the graveyard. That's it for the main deck. Let's go ahead and get right onto the extra deck. So, we are given 3 copies of Mirror Jade, the Ice Blade Dragon. This card is probably your main boss monster, especially when you're going first. In case you really need to stun on something, it's kind of just going to be Mirror Jade control. The non-targeting banish is really powerful, and I think it's really unique that they gave it the effect that it can only be used every other turn, which is something I don't think we've actually seen on a lot of cards. You know, usually if they want to do something like that, they say, oh, this card's effects are negated after, like, for the turn after you use it, right? But we've never really seen something that basically says this effect cannot be used the next turn, which I think is really good. It's better than being negated, you know? It's also excellent for breaking the opponent's board, especially when they have literally anything from the extra deck up. So it's really good going first or second, because you can either sit on it or you can use it to break stuff, especially because if it is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can actually nuke the opponent's entire board of monsters during the end phase, which is a bit niche, but it's going to make them have to try and play around it and try to lose as little resources as possible, or it's something that's completely inevitable that they can't really avoid. Next up, we have 3 copies of Albion and 3 copies of Lubellion. Both of them being able to fuse using your graveyard and stuff on summon is really powerful because you get to recur your resources so easily. I'd like to argue that Albion is better than Lubellion because light monsters, a lot of them do more things in your graveyard than your dark ones do, and also he does float into a branded spell at the end of the turn. I'm sorry, branded spell or trap actually, so it's even better. As well as Lubellion having to discard a card and having the attack prevention and everything. So Lubellion's a bit better at recurring your resources, but Albion is actually better in terms of utilizing your resources better and getting more bodies on board. Both of them are really powerful, however, and are great additions to the deck considering how many fusions we run, especially considering that you can make Mirror Jade even with your banished things and things in your graveyard, and so 3 of each is a pretty good number for the deck. And then finally, for just the miscellaneous fusions, we play 2 copies of Titaniclad, 2 copies of Brigand the Glory Dragon, and 2 copies of Sprint the Iron Dash Dragon. These are all really just here, not for their effects, but mainly just for their summoning conditions, because these are all the things that we summon off of Albaz for the most part, other than Mirror Jade, in case we need to break our opponent's board up. But that's going to be it for the extra deck. So a few things that you can add into the deck, or a few different archetypes or things that you can also add, is you can definitely play the Despia stuff. That's probably the best one to utilize it with. Or you can play things like Super Poly in the deck, because while you do have Albaz as his own Super Poly, he can be responded to, unfortunately. So what you can do is you can like normal summon Albaz using effect. They chain something, and then you chain Super Poly so that they can't do anything else. And that's a really great way to avoid getting your Albaz basically stopped, quote unquote, even though it is still going to be negated, obviously, but you'll still get the Super Poly to go off and essentially do the exact same thing. And of course, you can run just about any archetype that synergizes with it. You can run things like Predaplant, or you can honestly just put Branded Fusion in just about anything. But overall, I think that the Albaz Strike structure deck is a great structure deck for Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like even just 3 of them can really give you a good, maybe not super competitive deck, but definitely something that can be viable, especially in a local setting. But with that out of the way, that's gonna have to do it for the video. Tell me in the comments below what you think about the deck profile. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked it, please sure leave a like, as I'll split this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you liked it and want to see more content like it, then press consider subscribing, because we're on the way to 1,500 subscribers by the time I graduate. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.